Ciao everyone, this is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel, and it's a red letter day around here because this is my very first response video. But before we get the stone rolling and we dive into all of that excitement, just as a reminder that if you like videos about the culture, politics, and religion from a different POV, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to ring the bell for notifications. Rania Khalek, as per the great god Google, is an American writer and political commentator. She's written for sites like Vice, Al Jazeera, The Nation, and she co-hosts a podcast called Unauthorized Disclosure. I don't know her personally, and to be completely candid with you gang, I've never listened to her show. But just giving her work a quick glance over shows that when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, she comes down squarely on the side of the Palestinians. Some of the titles of her blog include Leaked Emails that show donors drive Hillary Clinton's pro-Israel stance, Israel lobby smears black lawmakers for meeting Palestinians, Obama hands Israel largest military aid bill in history, all on a site called the Electronic Intifada. Intifada being the word used to describe the Palestinian uprising in the West Bank in 1987. This is to say nothing against Khalek or her character. If she wants to support the Palestinians over the Israelis, it's a free country, and just because she does, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that she's some sort of baby-sacrificing, devil-worshipping, Dungeons and Dragons playing person. However, I draw the line when people out and out lie in order to make a point or to boost their own position. And I don't care who you are, whether you are left or right, a man or a woman, or these days anything in between, or whether you're white, black, purple, green, or red. But that's exactly what Khalek did at the end of last year when she described Palestine as the testing laboratory for Israeli weapons.
Palestine is Israel's personal laboratory for testing, refining, and showcasing methods and weapons of domination and control. Easy access to a captive and disenfranchised Palestinian population to experiment on has given rise to a booming homeland security industry in Israel that repackages occupation-style repression for use on marginalized populations in other parts of the world.
To start things off, Palestine is not some sort of disenfranchised minority or oppressed group. Israel actually left Gaza in 1995, and ever since then it's been ruled by the Palestinian Authority, currently under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas. Heck, the people there even can vote and elect Palestinian leaders, whenever the Palestinian Authority deems that it's time for another election. But even more importantly, Israel is only able to test, refine, and showcase technologically superior weapons because of its unique and, quite honestly, unenviable position. Israel has existed as its own country for only 70 years, 71 this May, but in that span of time, it has fought 8 wars, averaging 1 war every decade, with some of those wars including the Sinai Campaign, the Six-Day War, the War of Attrition, and the Yom Kippur War. That is a hell of a lot of wars in such a short span of time. To put that into more context, the United States has existed as its own country for 242 years and has only fought 12 wars in that span of time. Additionally, a lot of the modern violence between Palestine and Israel is because of a little something called Hamas, which, curiously, coincidentally, is never mentioned in Khalek's video. Hamas, created in 1987 as an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, started calling for the destruction of Israel in 1988, and in 1993 actually started sending suicide bombers over to Israel, which got it labeled as a terrorist organization by the United States in 1997. In fact, a lot of the attacks which Israel launches against Palestine, against the Palestinians, are in retaliation or in defense against Hamas, which is something that you would never know just listening to Khalek.
The most extreme version of the laboratory dynamic is the Gaza Strip, which functions as an open-air testing ground for weapons of mass destruction. Gaza is home to nearly 2 million Palestinians, many of them refugees and the descendants of refugees who were forced out of their homes in 1948. Gaza is basically an open-air prison, surrounded by an air, sea, and land blockade. This makes it a convenient laboratory for Israel's most destructive weapons. In the summer of 2014, Israel launched a brutal 51-day bombing campaign in Gaza that killed over 2,000 Palestinians, including more than 500 children.
What Khalek just described was Operation Protective Edge, which started when Hamas operatives kidnapped and murdered 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank. In retaliation, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu started cracking down on Hamas operatives in the West Bank. Hamas, for its part, answered with a missile barrage against Israel. 131 missiles were launched against Israel between July 7th and July 8th of 2014. And in answer to that, Israel retaliated with its own missile barrage. But Nate, what about the high Palestinian death toll? What about those Palestinian children that were killed? Well, a lot of those deaths can be laid down at the feet of Hamas too, because Hamas has a little habit, I guess you could call it, of hiding its weapons, including missiles, in places like schools, hospitals, and mosques. And this isn't some sort of right-wing Israeli-fed conspiracy theory. The United Nations has acknowledged that Hamas does it. Heck, even the website Vox, which is one of the last places you would think of being as a bastion of right-wing radical conspiracy theories, has admitted that this is modus operandi for Hamas. Now, an argument has been made that even though Hamas hides its weapons, hides its missiles in mosques, in schools, and in hospitals, Israel still doesn't have the right to target those places. And some people have even taken this a step further and said that Israel really is just using this as an excuse to beat up on the Palestinians, because Palestine doesn't pose any threat to Israel, which is the big technological power of the Middle East. But a few things have to be said about this. First, as a matter of self-defense, Israel is perfectly within its rights in targeting weapons that are going to be used by a terrorist organization to kill Israeli citizens, especially when we understand that Israel actually warns Palestinian civilians before an attack takes place, giving Palestinian civilians time to take shelter. Second, it is true that some of the weapons that Hamas uses are antiquated. The Qassam missiles, for instance, have a very short range and they have no guidance program. But Hamas has also smuggled in higher tech weapons like the Iranian Fajr missiles, which have a long enough range to actually target Jerusalem, and in the case of the 2017 models, actually have a GPS system in them, meaning that they're guided. On top of that, Iran, and no friend of Israel itself, has admitted to giving Hamas the parts needed so that they can actually make their own Fajr missiles. Third, it can be very easy reading many of the stories that come out on this that Israel is just some sort of gun-toting, trigger-happy entity which is more than willing to take pot shots at Palestinians whenever it can. But this hides the fact that more often than not, the violence that Israel directs towards Palestine, Hamas in particular, is because of violence done to it. Take the protests that happened last year, caused by the moving of the U.S.-Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. A lot of the stories made it sound as if the Israeli border patrol was just sniping off Palestinians who were peacefully protesting. What was usually not mentioned in those stories was the fact that Palestinians, particularly young men, were burning tires and rolling them towards the Israeli border to create a smoke screen for their friends, who would then rush up to the Israeli border patrol to throw stones and Molotov cocktails at them. A senior Hamas official, Mahmoud al-Zahar, actually admitted after these protests on Al Jazeera that, quote, "When we talk about peaceful resistance, we are deceiving the public. This is peaceful resistance bolstered by military force," unquote. So in other words, Hamas takes full advantage of the civilian population in Palestine in order to achieve its terrorist goals against Israel.
Since 1985, Israel has supplied 60.7% of the world's drones to at least 50 different countries. That's quite an achievement for a country no bigger than New Jersey.
Not when you're fighting a terrorist organization that hides amongst the population and is doing its damnedest to blow you up from the face of the earth. And I'm sorry, but when you get good at something through repeated experiences, other people usually come to you for your expertise. Isn't that just reasonable?
Under the cover of counterterrorism training, nearly every major U.S. policing agency, from local police departments to ICE to the FBI, has traveled to Israel for lessons in occupation enforcement, crowd control, use of force, media spin, and Islamic fundamentalism. These police exchanges are organized by pro-Israel groups like the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee's Project Interchange. The police officers who participate are taking the lessons they learned in Israel back to the United States, according to the ADL.
It's true that Israel does train a good number of police departments. After 9/11, Israel offered its counterterrorism expertise to a West that was newly reminded that there were people out there who wanted nothing better than to see the West dead. But to argue that Israeli training of our police force leads to violence against minority groups here at home, it's a classic example of false cause fallacy, because in order for that to be true, you would have to prove that first, Israel commits human rights violations against the Palestinians, and then you'd have to prove that American police perform human rights violations against minority groups specifically because of their Israeli training. But neither one of these propositions holds up. Groups like Human Rights Watch try to argue that Israel is guilty of human rights abuses against Palestine, citing Israel targeting civilian centers and occupying Palestinian territory like the West Bank. However, like we've already seen, Hamas is deliberately hiding weapons in schools and hospitals and is using the Palestinian population to advance its terrorist goals against Israel. And Israeli settlements in the West Bank don't violate international treaties like the Fourth Geneva Convention, like some people argue, which forbids the moving of a population into territory taken over by force. The convention doesn't say anything about the voluntary movement of people into a territory, especially when that people or their ancestors were forcibly removed from that territory, like the Jews were from the West Bank. And furthermore, it says nothing about a people voluntarily moving into a territory that was not under a legitimate ruler when they moved in the first place. Furthermore, according to Eugene Rostow, who was an Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs during the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson, Israel is completely within its rights to make settlements in the West Bank because of UN Resolution 242, which was created immediately after the Six-Day War in 1967. Resolution 242 states that Israel can keep and administer the territory that it took during the Six-Day War until a lasting peace is created in the Middle East. And seeing as how Hamas is still sending missile barrages and suicide bombers over into Israel, and Iran is still calling out for the total obliteration of Israel, yeah, a lasting peace hasn't come yet, guys. And training with Israeli forces has not made police departments across America more racist or more inherently racist. Heather McDonald in the Wall Street Journal in 2016 wrote that studies had consistently shown that the police were 3 times less likely to shoot an unarmed suspect if the suspect was black than if he was white, and that furthermore, the lethal use of force during an arrest was twice as likely to happen when the suspect was white instead of black. This isn't to say, of course, that every Israeli is an angel, or that every time an Israeli soldier kills a Palestinian, that it's a case of a good guy killing a bad guy. People are people. That means that there are good people and there are bad people intermixed together. Heck, that means that good people can sometimes act horribly. The point that I'm trying to make is that Israel faces one of the greatest challenges that a country can: the continual threat of its own extinction. Whether we're talking about Hamas suicide bombers, missile barrages, terrorist tunnels, or neighbors like Iran saying that you are descended from apes and pigs and deserve to be nuked off of the map. Given these very real and still active threats, Israel is just doing what any country would do, what every country should do, what every country has a right to do: defend itself and defend its own people. But what say you? Is Israel justified in defending itself in the manner that it has been? Or is there a better way for it to counter Hamas's attacks against it? As always, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Well, that about wraps it up for this time, gang. As always, if you liked this video, whether you agree with me or not, don't forget to hit down on the like button. Trust me, as a small and relatively new channel, every little bit helps guys to gain traction. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to ring the bell for notifications, because I put new videos out like this every Tuesday, and you're not going to want to miss them. Thank you as always for watching, and I will see you all again here next week on Top of the Stone. Ciao.